Welcome, everybody, to this episode, if you will, of Lex Advanced, Achieving HTML Literacy. I wanted to invite you, as we always do, to join the conversation on Twitter. You can find us at ZulaCat, and you can also surf that EdTech hashtag if you're looking to learn things about educational technology. Let's move right along. I wanted to tell you after this workshop that you will be able to recognize elements and syntax of HTML. And that's not all. You'll be able to navigate the structure of an HTML document. You'll be able to edit HTML code. You'll be able to write your own HTML. Yes, really. Can a person learn HTML in a 1-hour workshop? Well, I guess we're about to find out. However, there are some caveats, some limits to what we can do in an hour. We won't get into style, also known as cascading style sheets, CSS. We won't get into that. We'll refer to it, but we won't get into it. And that's too bad, because that's where the fun is. And by fun, of course, I mean that's where the practical application is. I have found when we're talking about bringing this home to Brightspace and so on, that really a lot of the practical application does come in the implementation of style. But in order to do that, we have to have a firm foundation in HTML. So we'll do that next semester, all right? So just stay tuned, stay with us for next semester. I was going to try to cover it on 1 hour, and that just seemed foolish. So I did want to mention, though, that this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because it was the first workshop that I ever did at Xavier in 1999. You'll see that the photography was so primitive back then that you can barely even see who was in attendance. I took those pictures myself, so of course I'm not in any of those pictures. I don't know if any of you who are here today were there in 1999. Anybody? No? Okay. But I do know that Biljana, at least, was in a workshop shortly thereafter. Not the very first one. See, we were so off our game on that very first one, we didn't even do it in the teaching lab. But we soon made the correction. So you see here a couple more photos. There's one of the earliest known photos of me in the upper right-hand corner teaching, trying to teach people about HTML. So anyway, also wanted to mention, yes, there is a wiki resource for this, catwiki.zula.edu. There will be a support page. So all the stuff that I'm mentioning here, anything that I talk about will be on the wiki on a single place. So you don't have to worry about trying to capture that link or whatever. I'm going to put it all there for you. It's not quite ready. This video will be posted there and so forth. And that brings me to the actual substance of my presentation, Introduction to HTML. To start with just a tad bit of review. In the whole concept of hypertext actually should be very close to our hearts because we're in academia and many of us work with texts all the time, all different kinds of texts, right? Books, journal articles, essays, and the like. We live really in a world of texts. These texts don't exist in splendid isolation. They're really in a whole universe of other texts, and they all tend to refer to one another. And wouldn't it be nice if we could actually link directly from one text to another text? And that, in fact, has been an idea, a dream for a long time. And that's what we call hypertext. The most significant hypertext system ever devised is undoubtedly World Wide Web, originally all one word, invented by Tim Berners-Lee in 1990, 30 years ago, when he was working at the Particle Accelerator Laboratory in Europe, known as CERN. He devised this hypertext system. He also specified that it would be distributed over a network. It wouldn't just be on one machine, in other words. And he devised it with an open architecture so that people could add to it. it could be extended really indefinitely. And significantly, he put it in the public domain, which obviously had huge implications for the where we now see how the web has grown. There were two pieces of software that he first implemented: a client, or what we would now call a browser, a web browser, and a server, a web server. And the model, a very simple model, that the client would send a request to the server and the server would send a response back to the client. Very simple stuff. But that's not all. He also specified a way that this communication would occur. That had to be a protocol. And he called it the HyperText Transfer Protocol, just the technical specification of how this communication is going to occur. You'll see it a lot of times now, HTTP with an S on the end, because there's been an increasing emphasis in recent years on encryption, making those transactions encrypted. The S just stands for secure. Of course, what's being sent after you make a request, usually what's being sent back by the server to the client or the web browser is usually a document or a web page. So Tim Berners-Lee had to write come up with a language that these documents would be written in, called HTML, which stands for HyperText Markup Language. And that's the subject of our little workshop today. So I'll be getting into that more. Let me also mention, I said it was distributed over the network. That means, of course, a network is just all these machines hooked up together, right? The internet is a vast array of networks. So where is that document anyway on all these machines? He had to also invent some kind of way of finding that document amongst the many, many places it could be. And he came up with something called the URL, a Uniform Resource Locator. That's right. Here's a URL actually from back in the day when I first did this presentation. This was the sample that I took. It probably doesn't work now because we've rearranged things. But this is has all the components, and it's very familiar stuff, but let's break it down. First of all, there's the service, as we mentioned before, the HyperText Transfer Protocol, and then a colon and a slash, probably overkill. I think Tim Berners-Lee thought he overdid it with all that punctuation. But we then have the host, the name of the machine or the server where this document is going to be residing. In this case, the name of the host is www.xula.edu. And then we have what we call the file details. In this case, we're saying that it's in a directory or a folder called ITC, and the name of the document itself, the file itself, is help.html. That's just saying that we're referring to that file in that folder on that server. And of course, these can take, they can look different, URLs. They don't all look exactly like that. I'm not going to get into all the details. But I will mention, important to remember, you can't have any spaces in your URLs, and you really shouldn't have any special characters or the diacritical marks and enye or umlauts and stuff like that. You can have them, but they have to be encoded, and we're not going to open up that can of worms. So getting on to HTML, the subject. It is hypertext, as we mentioned, just a way of linking documents. It is hypertext markup, which means that we're going to take plain old text and mark it up with special formatting code. And it is a language, which means that it has a syntax, it has a vocabulary. Note that unlike maybe a lot of computer languages you might think about are executable, HTML is not an executable language, it's a declarative language. So it's just saying how things are, not what to do. So that means that it is simple. It's somewhat easy to learn, as I hope to prove, and it is somewhat forgiving. When we talk about using HTML, we're mostly talking about making documents, HTML documents, web pages. And of course, each HTML document is a file. We can further specify that it is a text file, often containing references to other files. So let's go one step further and say it is a hypertext file, as I've mentioned. And forgive me if I'm belaboring the obvious, but things like images or videos or audio files and so forth are separate files. HTML has this great multimedia capability, right? You can combine all these things, but they're all separate files. So if you have a web page with two pictures in it, a frowny face and a smiley face, we're really talking about three files at the very least. You've got your text file, but you've also got the two image files, one for the frowny face, one for the smiley face. Okay, and just as a general rule of thumb, file names should probably end with .html or .htm, especially if you're just getting started with this stuff. Now, HTML files are viewed in web browsers. Web browsers are things I'm sure all of you know, things like Chrome, or this is a picture of Netscape. This is actually a picture from, I believe, 1999, one of the first popular browsers. But all a browser is a software program that reads HTML, that translates HTML into a format that's friendly for your eyeballs. The browser reads the HTML file. It interprets text between these special brackets. You might think of those as less than or greater than signs, but in the world of web authoring, we call them pointy brackets. Anyway, the text between pointy brackets will be our code. The other text will just be the content. So in other words, the stuff between the pointy brackets are special formatting instructions. It's not going to be displayed in the web browser. The other stuff that's not between the pointy brackets is what will be displayed or rendered onto the screen for you to see, according to the special formatting instructions between the pointy brackets. Are you with me so far? I hope so. And you're probably wondering, well, show us some of this stuff. I'm getting to that. I will in just a moment. But first, I have to tell you about the first browser war, 1995 to 2001, a great historical event. This is mainly between Netscape and Internet Explorer. There were other browsers that played important roles, but these were the two biggies. And this was really a mixed blessing. There were some good things. There was a lot of innovation at this time period. But there was also what we call browser-specific HTML. In other words, different browsers would come up and kind of invent and support their own HTML to do special things in their browser, but it wouldn't work in the other browser. And that was a problem, obviously. It was a nightmare, in fact, a huge headache for anybody who was trying to put content out on the web. The upside was that it led to a focus, an increased understanding of the need for standards. And that leads us not quite to HTML5, we're not quite there yet, but we'll get there. It led to the emergence of the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, a standards-making body, which came up with HTML versions, standards, 2.0, we had 3.2, and then when we got to 4, that was the big one, the revolutionary one. It was simpler. It was provided for the logical structure of a document, but it did not provide for the presentation, for the appearance or the style of a document. That would be done with style sheets, and that's what I was mentioning earlier. They were not going to really cover. This may require a new way of thinking. It required a new way of thinking 20 years ago. And it still probably requires a new way of thinking for a lot of people if you're not already versed in web authoring. And I'll explain that in a moment. After 4.0, things got a little foggy, a little difficult. XHTML was promoted. A lot of people didn't like the direction of XHTML. That led to the formation of the WHATWG. That's right, the WHATWG, the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group, which is another consortium with a lot of big players, a lot of stakeholders like Apple and Google and other names that you may be familiar with. And they promoted, then we had the second browser war, of course, from 2004 all the way to 2017, a protracted battle. Again, lots of browsers, but mainly this was between Internet Explorer and Chrome. And I think we all know Chrome has come out on top. The upshot of all that was then, in the meantime, the emergence of HTML5. Probably not as revolutionary as HTML4, but a lot of nice additions and standardizations. I think HTML5 is going to be with us for a long time because the WHATWG, which is really taken over this as the World Wide Web Consortium has kind of faded and ceded authority to the WWIG. The HTML5 is promoted as a living standard that they're going to continually update. And so I think until something big happens, we're just going to see, kind of like we have in Brightspace, the rolling updates every month, right? The continuous delivery updates. It's kind of like that with HTML5. We're just kind of continuing to add to it. So you're never up to date. But at least we don't have major pain either. Oh, okay, so let's get down to brass tacks and talk about some actual basic syntax of how HTML5 works. There it is. That's the basic thing. You have some markup, then you have content, and then you have some more markup. Remember I said the markup comes between these pointy tags, these pointy brackets. So in this case, we see an opening tag and a closing tag. The closing tag is differentiated from the opening tag by forward slash. It's different than a backslash on your keyboard. I think of it as we read from left to right, and that's slash is kind of leaning forward, if that helps. So here's an actual example. HTML is easy. You notice that it's surrounded by tags, opening P tag and a closing P tag. We call this the container model. And containers can be nested. So we could open this up and say HTML is pretty easy. The whole thing is encased in the P tags, but then we have pretty encased in these M tags. So we have two opening tags and two closing tags. And furthermore, let me show you a contrary example. I could switch those closing tags around. So now we have the P tag closing while the M tag is still open, and then the M tag closes. That's a no-no. That would be improperly nested. That would be invalid. You don't want to do that. Tags are used to designate elements. So we're not just putting letters on here to be funny. The P tag in this case means paragraph. We're saying HTML is pretty easy as a whole paragraph. And the M tag in this case stands for emphasized. M for emphasized. It's an emphasized phrase. HTML is pretty easy. And you notice how when I said that, I inflected my voice on the word pretty, which is a good way of remembering that we're talking about what things are, not what they look like. So when you look at this on the screen, it might be in italics. But if you had a screen reader reading that HTML to you, it might inflect that phrase by saying pretty and emphasizing it. That's the idea of semantic markup and this distinction between marking up what things are, the structure of a page, versus how things look, the separation of style and of content and presentation, structure and style. Okay, so this still may be kind of abstract. Let's get a little bit more concrete and talk about the anatomy of a web page. Every web page has a global structure. It's basically got a few big parts. First of all, the beginning of every page, there's behind the scenes, there should be a statement of the version information. Then there'll be an HTML. The whole page is really in this HTML element, which has a head and a body. And that would look like this. You see here that at the very, this is actually what an HTML5 document would look like, the bare minimum. You see the very first thing there, the doc type thing, that's a document type declaration. It just says that this is HTML5. Then we have the opening HTML tag. Then we have the head of the document. You see the opening head and closing head tags, within which there's only one thing, the title. That's required. That's the only thing that's required in a head. Then we have also the body, opening and closing body tags. There's nothing in there. You can put anything you want in there, within reason. And then the closing HTML tag. That's the structure at the global level of a web page. But that's kind of boring. We want to see actual content in a page. So I've got a button here to open up a web page, but this is going to throw everything off. All right, so this is a silly web page that has just many of the basic elements of HTML represented on it. It's a web page about coffee. You'll see a number of things here. We have headings and subheadings of various levels of subheadings, if you will. We have paragraphs. We have a block quotation from Gertrude Stein. We have some lists, and we have a bulleted list. We have a numbered list. We have a little table, and we even have a little line there going across the screen at the bottom. You might not even notice, and then a little statement of who made the page. These are all elements of an HTML page. Now, unless you're a web geek like me, you may not know, but when you're in Chrome or really most browsers, you can view the source of any HTML page really easy. Right? I can just right-click anywhere on this page, and a little pop-up menu I can choose View Page Source, and it will pop open in a new tab the HTML that makes this page happen. I kind of refer to this as looking under the hood. Like you pop open the hood of a car and look at the engine. This is the engine. This is just to prove that I'm not lying about any of this stuff. This is the HTML that makes that page. And you'll notice one of the features that Chrome has here is something called syntax coloring. So all the code in the pointy brackets is in a different color. And the text that's content is just in plain black. Now you'll notice also that this is a very simple web page. I've tried to keep it simple so that it's real clear. When you pop open view the source on another web page, things might look a lot different than this. It doesn't have to be so nice and neatly formatted for one thing. It can be all over the place. You can put all kinds of carriage returns and white space in here. It won't affect the look of the web page. The other thing that I hope that this isn't too much, but Chrome also offers you the opportunity, if we come back here and I do a right click, I also have this opportunity to inspect the web page. This is going to get crazy, so hold on to your hat. If I choose inspect, it's going to show me in the same pane all the HTML broken over here, or sorry, in a separate pane. Over on the right, I see the HTML. And as I put my mouse over different parts of the HTML, it actually highlights the section of the web page that the HTML refers to. And I can open up this list, for example. I can open up the list items. I can see there's where it says water. There's where it says ground coffee beans, and so forth. So if you want to get into exploring the structure of a web page, you can do it right in the web browser. Again, that's just a right click and choosing inspect. All right. I've wanted to show you also a little graphic that I devised. This shows that web page on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you see all the code that makes it happen. And everything is just labeled. You can see that we have the first and second level headings. We have paragraphs. We have that extended quotation. We have second and third level headings. We have that unordered list. And again, this is just something that I will share with you. It's kind of a reference. I'll put that on the wiki page that I talked about so that you can refer back to it if you want. What we talked about there first are block elements. These creates the big structure of a web page. If you can think of every web page that you've ever seen is divided into blocks, big blocks. And of course, you can have the blocks of content. You can have blocks within blocks, just as we talked about nesting things before. But if you squint at any web page, you'll see things in blocks. Blocks is just the big structure, things that start on a new line. That's the easiest way to remember it. Anything that starts on a new line is probably a block element. And these are things like paragraphs, headings, lists, tables. Most of the things that we saw in that sample web page that we were just looking at were blocks. And a little syntax. Remember I told you before about the container model? Right? You got the opening tag and the closing tag, and it's a container. Well, I kind of lied. That's not the only model. There is also what we call the empty content model. Something like this. This tag doesn't have an opening or a closing. It's just a single tag. It just sits there by itself. You can designate that sometimes with a closing slash right in the tag, just to, and that's kind of become optional in HTML5. You don't have to have that slash, but it's a nice way of saying, like, there's nothing missing here. This is the whole thing. What this tag, by the way, is HR. It does not stand for human resources. In this case, it stands for horizontal rule. So that line that I mentioned going across the web page is made with an HR tag, horizontal rule. Let's also mention inline elements. Of course, big block structure isn't enough to make a web page. So we also have the smaller structure of a web page, what we call inline elements, elements that are in the line of the text. This is, stylistically, we would be thinking of these as phrases, emphasized phrases, strong emphasis, bold or italics, but also things like subscripts and superscripts, and very significantly, images, and what we might call anchors, or in regular human language, links, what we call links. Those are all inline elements. I'll give you a little more syntax here because obviously, if you're going to have an image, you need a little more information. An image uses what we call the image tag is IMG, but you have to have a little bit more than IMG. You have to say what image you want to point to, right? What image you want to include in your web page. So we see here a couple more things. Most HTML elements can be expanded to include what we call attributes for more information, to make those elements richer. In this case, we have to, but the attributes always follow the same pattern. They come in name value pairs. Name, you have an equal sign, and then you have a value in quotation marks. So in this case, we've got a little web page. Let's say it's called somepage.html. It's got our two images, our frowny face and our smiley face. So let's say that image file in question is called frown.gif. Well, to pull this off, if they're in the same folder, we would just have a tag like this, IMG, and then we have the source attribute, src, that's code for source, equals frown.gif. That just is a little bit of HTML that says put an image here and have the image be that file, frown.gif. Now it gets a little more complicated depending on how you have your files arranged relative to one another. The HTML file relative to the image. I'm not going to get into all of that in the interest of time. But I do have to mention the anchor tag. Probably the quintessential signature element of HTML would be the link, right? We call them anchors. The opening anchor tag and the closing anchor tag, it has to have an attribute, a hyperreference attribute to show what the link is pointing to. href is the code for hyperreference. And in this case, we are pointing to a file called another.html. Whatever you're pointing to, the href attribute is going to be how you do it, how you make that pointing. So in this particular case, we would end up with some linked text on the web page. What the user would see in their web browser would be blah, blah, but it would link to another.html. And of course, there's other ways that links can be structured. In the bottom example here, we have what we would call a fully formed URL with the HTTP : / and all that jazz. You, when in doubt, you probably want to use that, but I'm not going to get into all the subtleties. So to sum up, HTML provides a way for marking up the logical structure of a page, not necessarily the appearance. So we have to think in terms of what things are, not how they look. We use HTML for structure. We're going to use something like style sheets for appearance, but we're not really going to get into that today. And really, that's the end of the presentation part. I did want to invite you to do an interactive little bit of exercise with me and to stay with me for a little bit here to talk about how we put this into Brightspace. So let me share my screen once again and take you to a called w3schools.com. And this is a really handy reference. If there's one site that I want to refer you to learn more about HTML, I think it'd probably be w3schools.com. There's lots of ways to learn about HTML online, as you can imagine. But this has a lot of really great features. In particular, it lets you experiment around with actual HTML code right on the site. And you can even change the code from dark to light just by clicking a little button. Isn't that cool? I mean, why would you want to work in this bright kind of mode when you could work in dark mode? I think that that's a lot more fun. So there's also all kinds of references and learning tools here. Let me show you this interactive part. Try it yourself using dark mode, right? So this is a sample HTML page, a kind of bare minimum. On the left-hand side, I see the code. On the right-hand side, I see what that would look like in the web browser. And I can change that and say this. I can change the content to, I might even not even spell it right. When I click run, it's going to change what appears over there. This is not a paragraph. Well, that doesn't change the fact that it is a paragraph. So I can edit the content. I can actually edit the HTML. It's still a paragraph because it's the P tag, right? But what if I was to change that to something else? Like, what should we make it? Let's make it a list item. Now, this is not really proper because a list item should be nested inside of an ordered or unordered list, but it's still, HTML, as I mentioned, is kind of forgiving. So this is no longer a paragraph. So you see how that works? You edit on the left-hand side, click on the right-hand side. Let me go back to the main page, w3schools.com, and show you that if you go to references here too, you'll also, a lot of references, you got an HTML tag reference. So you can look up and discover what any HTML tag is. There's just a whole long list of them. There's really not that many, but there's probably a lot to consider when you're first coming to this. We can click on, for example, H1 to H6. This gives us the idea that these are the heading tags, H1, H2, H3, H4. Try it yourself. Click the button, and here I see all the headings on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, what they would look like in the web browser. And notice that they're reminding us that we use these elements for actual headings, not to make the text bold or big, right? But this is the idea of semantic markup. So what I wanted to do was to kind of turn you guys loose on this for about 5 minutes, let's say. And can we do that? I would like to invite you to go to w3schools.com. Let me put the link to the tag reference here in the
I'm
chat.
sorry. I'm sorry, Bart, you're being so serious, but do you have werewolves in your house?
Yes, sorry, the wolves are howling. I'm going to turn that off in a minute. Come on. You know, I did mute my phone before this, but we now see the limitations of putting my phone on mute. Okay, so what I've done is put in the chat the link to that tag reference. I would like to turn you all loose just for 5 minutes, let's say. Get on that site and play around. Experiment a little bit with the, look up a tag that you want to learn more about and run some of those experiments. You get in there and edit a little bit and just have some fun with it, and we'll reconvene at 1/4 after. How does that sound? All right, it is 1/4 after, so if I could ask you all to come on back home. Appreciate it. I felt, despite the highly theoretical nature of this presentation, that it was important to get some interactivity, some kind of hands-on stuff. I have thrown a lot of stuff at you. If it's unfamiliar, might seem like a lot. If you're very familiar with this, you might have been bored to tears. But let's now talk about how we put this into practice in the Brightspace learning management system. I'm going to start a screen share again. And yes, let's come here. So we've got our sample web page about coffee. I just want to show an example of what happens when we kind of take content from HTML content and bring it into Brightspace. We can select all of this and copy it, and then come here into my awesome class in Brightspace, my sandbox course, and I can create a file, an HTML file, right? That's what happens when you create a file. And we can just say that this is a test, coffee test. We'll call it coffee test. And then I'll just come down here and paste. And right away you can see like what it does look kind of, it looks more or less the same, but kind of different, doesn't it? I don't know if you noticed. Maybe you didn't. This is a very simple page. But you notice if we go back to the original, it looks a little bit different. The font is different. How did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, anytime you're wondering about kind of weird things that are going on in the creation of your HTML files on Brightspace, you can always take a look at the code. So when it tells us this is the HTML editor that we're using now, but to get into the source code, you have to use the HTML source editor. That's this little button down here. It's got the pointy brackets that we've come to know and love with the / in there, right? That's kind of emerged, I guess, as a symbol for HTML now. If we click on this, it's going to show us the HTML source. And you'll notice it's actually a little bit different than the HTML source from my document. You may not jump right out at you, but in particular, you'll see this. I've highlighted there the opening body tag, which has a style element, which I didn't have in my original HTML page. That's something that Brightspace has done for me. Because when I copy, I can't copy the entire, when I copy the way I did, I don't get all the HTML. I only get what's kind of showing up in the web browser. If I really wanted to be more accurate to the actual, more faithful to the original HTML document, I could do that. I could come back here to my web page. And remember, we saw how to view the source of any page on the web. I can just choose View Page Source, and here it is, right? So if I do this, if I select everything here, select all, and copy, and then go into Brightspace using the source editor now. Keep in mind, I'm using the HTML source editor, and paste that in here. It's going to look a little different. This is the exact HTML that I'm pasting in. Notice that the opening body tag from my document did not have that style attribute. Now, when I click Save, it's going to show a little bit different. Really, the difference is just the font, because all that was happening with that style tag, the style attribute, rather, that we saw before, was that Brightspace was specifying a font and a font family to use. Now that we no longer have that, it's just using the default browser font instead, which in this case is probably Times New Roman or something like that. So this is kind of a trivial example, but it shows you the difference of where you copy and paste from. If you copy and paste web content from what you're seeing in a web page, then you're going to get one result that might be sufficient because it does a pretty good job much of the time. But if you really want to be accurate and faithful to the original source, you would really have to go into the HTML source, copy it all, and paste it into the HTML source editor. Okay. We don't even need to save this. There are a couple other things. Now, as I mentioned before, most of the fun, most of the practical application occurs with styles, and we're not going to get into styles. However, I've been searching around for, however, you do need to know that HTML in order to use the styles. I've been searching around for things that you could only do just with HTML. Practical applications in Brightspace, and I think I finally found one. And if we look at this document, I don't know how practical it is, but you see here a picture of some bread, right? And if I put my mouse over the picture, it says pan de muertos, bread of the dead. This is a bread that is traditionally baked in, I guess, in Mexico on the Day of the Dead. So, but how did that little thing pop up there on the screen? That's kind of nice. Maybe I would like to do it. Well, it's done with some HTML. Most of the reason that I had to search for something like this is because the HTML editor in Brightspace is pretty good. It does most of the things that most of the people are going to want to do most of the time. So I had to search and search to find some aspect of HTML that is not supported in the Brightspace editor. I'll show you how it's done. I have to go to Edit HTML. Still not here, but I have to go to the HTML source. Go to the HTML source. And here, we're going to see the image tag. I'll highlight it for you just to highlight it all. There's the image tag. Don't be frightened if you're not used to looking at HTML. Just note, let's break it down into its component parts. IMG opens the image tag. It's an empty content, so it doesn't even going to have a closing tag. The SRC attribute points to where the image is. It's on, we can see here that it's on Flickr. That's the actual URL of the image itself. There's a width attribute saying how wide it is, a height attribute as well. There's the alt attribute, which specifies alternate text for people who can't see, can't see the photo for some reason, or maybe the photo has gone missing. And it says the alternate text, this is important for accessibility reasons. The alternate text is photo showing 3 loaves of bread. Well, now all of this can be handled, by the way, through the Brightspace. What you see is what you get WYSIWYG editor. Right? We don't have to go into the source code for any of this. But then we have this final thing, the title attribute. The title attribute gives the title of the photo, a little bit different from the alternate text, and is rendered by most HTML browsers as a pop-up tooltip, as it's called. So that's why when I looked at this through my in my web browser, I get that little pop-up, that little tooltip that says pan de muertos. The only way to do it, for now, until the next version of the HTML editor for Brightspace, the only way to do it is by editing the HTML source code. Now, why would you need to do it? In fact, this could be a nightmare as far as accessibility is concerned, because if you're trying to build an accessible web page, obviously you don't want to bury things in these kind of tooltips that people may or may not be able to see, but it might have some use at some time. You can actually add the title element to the title attribute, rather, to almost any HTML element. So here, I've put a different title for this mystery link that will actually tell you what the link is. Visit the photo on Flickr. You can, I have my list here from that coffee page, and I've put a different title element for each item in the list. This is kind of silly, but it shows what's possible. And it shows how you can get into trouble too, because if I actually edit this link in the HTML editor, the Brightspace HTML editor, you see that what they call a title is not what what HTML calls the title attribute. What they're calling a title is the text that appears on the screen. So if I even try to mess with this in the HTML editor, I'll destroy my title attribute that gives it a pop-up. You'll see now that I no longer have my, oh, I do still have it. It's because I didn't actually make any changes. But if I were to edit this in the HTML editor and say, yeah, it's my mystery link. I'll get rid of one of the question marks and update it. Now, I no longer have that little tooltip. So you see that once you get into monkeying with the HTML, you can create a world of pain for yourself because there's all kinds of funny things that can happen, especially when you're at cross purposes trying to do something a little bit advanced. But that's mainly what you're going to be using your knowledge of HTML for, is to do stuff that's a little bit more advanced. Mostly, this would be bringing in HTML from other sites, if that's needed. Sometimes you will be bringing in HTML from an embedded in another site, little embed codes that you can copy and paste. You might have to get into the HTML there. You can also set the language attribute for any element, including the entire page. That, I believe, is something that can only be done with the editing the HTML source, the language attribute, or the lang attribute as it's called. However, given the fact that we don't have anybody from the languages here today, I don't believe, so I thought I'd mention that in case there was anybody, but since there's not, I think that we can, at this point, ask any questions about HTML or HTML in Brightspace.
Does it work in announcements?
Jay is nodding.
Oh, yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. Yeah, it does. You can click on the HTML editor button down at the bottom of the window for announcements as well.
Jay, am I correct that it really works anywhere there's the HTML editor pop-up comes up, right? So anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's correct.
Yep. Yeah, on the content pages, on the main pages, as Bart was showing. Yep. As long as you got that little bracket, like Bart said, that kind of open, closed bracket button, that'll get you into the HTML editor.
I did do quite a bit of searching around for information about when you really need to go into that HTML source editor. And apparently sometimes in things like announcements and other things besides your standard file on Brightspace, sometimes there's things where kind of more unusual HTML can get a little wonky, a little off. Mm-hmm. And so like MathML, you're using some MathML equation. And the only way to solve some problems is getting into the HTML editor. Of course, if you're doing that, you probably are going to be needing to be familiar with some HTML. We also have found last week's workshop, 2 weeks ago, I guess now, was on HTML templates. We have found that sometimes selecting items from those templates can get a little tricky. And they've tried to make it as easy as possible, but sometimes it's just hard. And you can get into the HTML source to get the specific stuff you're looking for. Now you know, hopefully, a little bit about how you can find that stuff. Well, this really concludes our workshop. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. You all now have earned the HTML literacy badge. And you'll notice again, the little pointy brackets and the / that we talked about today. I'm always here as a resource for you. In addition to that wiki page resource that we'll be sending out, I'm here as a human resource that you can reach out to if you run into problems or questions about HTML. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much. And have a good evening. Let's hope that everything works out for this country.
Let's do. Thank you so much, Bart. We really appreciate learning from you. It's always a pleasure. Thanks, everybody, so much for giving us your time this evening. And be well. Be well during these uncertain times. It's nice seeing you.
Thanks, Bart. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.